Hey everyone, Zeddy here again today with a brand new video, and I wanted to try and give you guys a little bit of a break. The economy's tight in the game. We're going to be waiting on that, a little boost to the rewards track later on in the Battle Pass, and I thought, you know what, I'd offer up 4 budget decks that you can play right now in either Standard and Wild and expect to have good results with. Just be aware, because they're budget decks, they typically are a bit more on the aggressive side, so if you don't like the aggro decks or a little bit more of the aggressive strategy, these decks probably won't be for you. But other than that, these decks are all relatively cheap, around 5,000 dust or less. So let's take a look at 4 decks from both Standard and Wild that you can craft for a reasonable price right now. And again, if you just want the Wild decks, skip ahead to about halfway through the video. I'm going to start with Standard and then get to Wild. So first, we're going to start off in Standard with Soul Fragment Demon Hunter. Arguably the best deck right now in Standard, and it actually got a little bit cheaper. Believe it or not, this expansion. So, a lot of people have cut Sociologist Militia, which was a legendary card, basically, and made the curve a lot lower. So you have cards now like Bladed Lady, Relentless Pursuit, a bit more draw with like Spectral Sight, and these cards are all relatively cheaper. You have your 2 legendaries in here in Il'gynoth and Kane, and honestly, Il'gynoth you probably don't have to have, although it does give you a lot of burst with the Eldrazi Warblades, but other than that, you have a lot of rares and commons, and this deck comes in at like 4,600 dust, so it's like one of the best decks, and it's relatively cheap. So if you want to slam the Demon Hunter before the inevitable nerfs, this might be a good way to go. Another budget option is Aggro Demon Hunter, and this deck is even cheaper, much cheaper. This is also a really, really good deck, extremely aggressive. You can see literally the most expensive card here in mana is 3 cost in Silt Stepper and like some draw cards, and yeah, it's just super aggro. You vomit your hand with your early game, you draw with like Voracious Reader, you can draw with Acrobatics, and you can draw with Stilt Stepper, and I believe Stilt Stepper is like one of the only epics in the entire deck. Everything else is like rares and commons, so yeah, 2,100 dust or so, and this deck is extremely, extremely good at getting quick wins, but now with the Battle Pass system, that's not exactly the best technique for getting optimal XP, but if you want to rack up some wins, get a quick legend climb in, Aggro DH is absolutely a good choice to go. Next on the list is a bit more of a interesting deck in Evolve Shaman. Evolve Shaman is a relatively cheap deck that's doing really well, has a really good win percentage, and is built around, your weapon of Bog Spine Knuckles. You draw it with your Cage Match Custodian. And again, looking through this, there is not a ton of expensive cards. Escaped Mana Saber, I believe, is from Galakrond's Awakening Adventure, so if you don't have that adventure, don't worry about it. I don't think you really need Escape Mana Saber. You could cut it out. You could put in, like, Lightning Bloom. I don't see that in here. Maybe put in a Lightning Bloom. That's only a common. And yeah, the rest are relatively, like, rares, commons, and, like, really cheap cards. Your main combo with the deck is like Desert Hare into your Bog Spine Knuckles. You have Derailed Coaster to give you like a token board you can evolve. You have Mogu Flesh Shaper and Mutate, but overall, it's all about getting that one big swing where you get that one big evolution swing, get an unanswerable board state, and then win from there. And that's basically the deck. Horde Pillager gets you your weapon back, but as you can see, it's like 4,080 dust. It's not a very expensive deck, and it's doing a lot of work, and it's relatively new, so this is probably one of the more exciting budget options out there. And the last budget option is like the old reliable budget deck in Hearthstone history. We have Face Hunter coming in at just under 5,000 dust, mainly because there are 2 legendaries in the deck in Lorekeeper Polkelt and Dragonbane, and they are kind of important. You really do want Polkelt into Dragonbane, into all of your like burn stuff like Kill Command, Eaglehorn Bow, but everything else is like super low curve. You draw with Voracious Reader again. You can cheat out secrets with Face Stalker. It's just a very early aggressive deck. Pushes a lot of face damage, punish a lot of greed out there, and again, another one of these quick aggro decks. It's relatively cheap and very effective. So that covers the standard decks. If you're looking for standard, let's go into the wild decks. What are the best budget wild decks? And that can be a bit trickier because there's so many cards in wild, but we're going to start off with one of the best options out there with Aggro Druid. Yes, another aggro deck. They're cheap. And they're damn good. And Aggro Druid's one of the best decks in all of Wild. Like, it's a tier 1 deck. You craft this, you're going to have a lot of success. And, like, you have epics in there, like Embiggen. I think that's basically the only epic. And then you have your 1 legendary in Patches. And some people run Sir Finley. You absolutely don't need it. I had someone in my Discord earlier asking me about that. And literally just run a 1-drop. Like, you could put in, like, we got Infectious Sporling in there. That's Finley. It really doesn't matter. What matters is you draw your Embiggen, you draw your Pirate So you can draw buffed out patches, you can cheat out brigands, and then you just buff it with Mark of the Lotus, Power of the Wild, draw cards with Voracious Reader, and then kill your opponent with Savage Roar. It is a very hyper-aggressive deck, but it's very, very effective. You're going to get a lot of like turn 3, 4, and 5 lethals with this thing, and yeah, if you get answered by a couple board clears, you're done, but then you just queue up the next game and go again. And this deck has like been very good for multiple expansions. So wild budget decks are a lot safer to craft because they don't change nearly as often. Pretty much all the wild decks I'm going to suggest here have been meta for like the past year or so, and very unlikely for that to change. So speaking of that, our next suggestion is discard Warlock. This is like an aggressive mid-range-ish deck where you play a lot of cards that discard a lot of cards. So you have like Malkazar's Imp as your 1-drop, which helps you draw cards when you discard cards, but you want to discard like your Bone Web Egg, you want to discard Hand of Gul'dan primarily to draw basically your entire deck. You got Silverware Golems in there, Fist of Jaraxxus, and yeah, there's not too many, there's one legendary in the deck. There's the Solarium, this list doesn't, and the Prime, sorry. And then you don't really have any epics, you just have like rares and Doomguard, and I believe Expired Merchants are rare, but overall, it's a relatively cheap deck coming in at under 5,000 dust, and it has been really good, like I said, for almost a year now, and the deck is just ridiculous. It never runs out of fuel, you're always drawing cards, and you're usually fatiguing by like turn 6, 7, 8, and 9. It's ridiculous how fast this deck cycles, and it's just very effective and does a really good job. Next, this is more of an expensive budget option. This deck keeps getting more and more expensive. I'm highlighting an odd Paladin list here. It's like 7,700 dust, but there's a couple of cards you could definitely consider cutting from this. Like it has Lothraxion, you don't need it. It has Leroy, you don't need it. And it's got Baku. You kind of need that. So you honestly could cut those legendaries and put in like another Steward of Darkshire, like another Divine Favor, and then boom, you got 2 legendaries out of there, making this a much more reasonable budget option. But I highlight this one because Leroy is in a lot of people's collections already, and maybe open Lothraxion in the new set. But again, if you don't have them, take that out, and that's taking out like 3,200 dust, and you're at like a 4,000 dust deck. So Odd Paladin's been really solid and got a bit of a buff this expansion, primarily with this list has Day at the Fair, also with Oh My Yogg. It's just a really one-mana counterspell, protects your board really well, and of course with this deck you just flood the board with dudes, you buff them with Quartermaster, you buff them with your Steward of Darkshire, and you just win. You win with like those cards. That's basically it. Just keep flooding the board with dudes, buff them up, and win the game, and yeah, it does a really good job. This deck has been really solid, it can win a lot of games, and if you take those 2 legendaries out, it can be pretty cheap, but again, if you have them, throw them in there. I just put them in there because they're relatively common legendaries. And the last wild deck I will suggest is one of the better ones these days. Corbett hit rank 1 legend with his exact list. Secret Mage. Secret Mage has been meta in wild for I don't know how long, for well over a year or 2. Like, it's just ridiculously good, and it comes in at like 4,500 dust at the moment. There's a couple epics in there. You got Occult Conjurer, Rigged Fair Game, and then you have the new legendary of Sage, Seer of Darkmoon. If you have your old trusty Alaneth, you can throw that in there as well, but I do think Sage is better. I actually hit legend achievement hunting because I had to draw cards with Sage and try to get an Occult Conjurer achievement done, so I only ran those 2 cards instead of Alaneth, and I have like a 70% win rate to legend. The deck is extremely good, arguably tier 1, and yeah, the cards like Rigged Fair Game and Occult Conjurers put it way above. Like, you draw so many cards and you get such an insane board presence, and this deck is just extremely good at beating almost anything other than Priest, and it can beat Priest too, especially if you high roll early game that they can't answer. They can Reno, but then you just slam the board because you have all these 4/4s and all that stuff on board. It's just a really powerful deck, and again, coming in at under 5,000 dust is very effective on the budget, and can lead to good stuff. So yeah, these are all the budget decks that I will suggest for Standard and Wild. Again, the Wild decks always seem to last longer. Almost all of these have been meta for a really long time, so if you're on the fence about one of these, maybe go for a Wild one if you want to play some Wild, but thought I'd try and help you guys out. I know how tight dust and economy is these days, so hopefully this works out for you. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Have a great day, and stay salty, my friends.